First at 7:02. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Peter Talbot.
Here.
Jim Jinks.
Here.
Dina Allard. Here. Don Walsh.
Here.
David Belver.
Here.
Fiona Pearson.
Here.
Tricia Kramer. Greg Wolf.
Here.
John Mylone.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to start not with the book, but with handouts and do a review and close out of open prior fiscal year capital projects. And Sean, are you going to walk us through that then?
Yeah, we're just going to do I'll do kind of an introduction, and then I'll be handing it to Jim for kind of a discussion of the project closeouts, and then we'll segue right into education. So, first of all, welcome everyone back to budget workshops. I know you've missed them. Then, again, just for the public's knowledge, here we're talking about the capital budget, which of course goes hand in hand with the operating budget. But I did kind of want to just start by just very briefly introducing and reminding folks how the capital budget differs from the operating budget, and then how they're kind of related, and that will tie in to closeout the closeouts that we'll be doing here in just a few minutes, or covering as Jim walks through those projects. So just to start, so I'll hold on, I'm on the right page here. Let me. Sorry, I'm multitasking. All right, great. So I'm going to pull up a couple of different spreadsheets, but and we'll get you can ignore these for right now because we'll get to these in just a minute. But just a reminder for everybody, the way the capital budget works, right? So a capital budget, a capital project is really intended to be a distinct effort that crosses multiple fiscal years, right? A construction project, a large purchase, something that is going to take multiple years. Where you today, of course, is the first day of the new fiscal year, July 1st. So happy New Year, everybody. But the capital projects have a longer life for obvious reasons. And one thing that is just important to remember is what we're doing here at this level. I have a series of recommended capital projects. Department heads and the Board of Ed have submitted their recommended capital projects. I made some adjustments to those and forwarded them on in our books here, which you all brought with you tonight. And once the council approves those, right, following the hearing that we'll have and your final selection of year one projects, what you're basically doing is authorizing that project to move forward. Where the difference comes, especially with the operating budget, is the actual financing of that project. You're authorizing us to go out and bond the project, in some cases pay cash for the project, but ultimately that's the role of the finance director in conjunction with me as we determine once a project is ready to be moved forward, how that financing is going to take place. Again, typically that's with bonds, and the bonds are borrowings that we make upon the time of the project either being underway or soon therefore to be underway. And then what happens if a project is not completely spent? So if you have a project, you have remaining project authorization that's not the project has come in under budget, to put it more simply, and you have authorization but you haven't yet bonded, that project or that remaining amount of the project can just be deauthorized, right? We haven't borrowed any money, there's no actual cash in any sort of account assigned to that project, but you can simply deauthorize, which will be an effort we're going to do here in just a few minutes to show you what we have planned for an upcoming meeting when we'll formalize it. But that's not actually saving you any money, right? Because you didn't borrow anything behind it. You've taken back the permission to spend the rest of that balance. Let's say it was a $400,000, let's say, air conditioner project. Just, I don't know. but it only costs $350,000. If we only borrowed $350, and we can borrow those in tranches, then that $50,000, if we close out that project, that's not $50,000 of found money. It's just deauthorizing the project. The I guess a different situation is when we have borrowed a project. Then you have what are called bond proceeds. We borrowed for a full project. Let's say that $400,000, and then the project comes in $350,000. Then that $50,000 is bonded borrowings that we can then reapply to other authorized projects, and you'll see that in just a second on the spreadsheet, and that reduces the amount you have to borrow for that project. Okay, does that make sense? So just kind of a refresher as to how the capital projects and the financing works. I know sometimes there's some confusion around whether closing out a project generates available cash or available funding or additional borrowing authorizations or anything like that. So just wanted to kind of remind folks of that, as it's been kind of a year since we've talked about some of these. And so any questions on that before I go forward?
Can you touch on how the deauthorization or the closing out of a project affects debt service? Because I think that'll show where one of the benefits.
So I could speak to
Yeah,
that a
why
little
don't
bit.
you go ahead.
So any project we come in under budget, or whether we bonded it or not. So if we had excess bond proceeds and I apply that to another project, obviously that reduces the amount that we can bond. But I project our debt service based on all our bond authorizations that are outstanding. So to the extent that little by little we can reduce those because they've come in under budget, or I guess that's pretty much it, right? If they come under budget or if we don't proceed with them. And there's a few I think that, we may not proceed with that have been on the books for a while.
Right. So exactly. So we will, and just to orient a little bit on that note, if you remember, and I know this was raised at some of our budget hearings, you remember page 39 of our budget book has the 5-year projections, and we have some pretty conservative estimates on that page. That includes the school budget, the town budget, and the debt service, which again we share in. It has a pretty significant increase to that line. You see it at around 11.8 million in the proposed budget on page 39, but it's 25.6 million in year 5. Part of the reason for that is Jim has to assume all of the projects on the capital plan. As we go through the capital plan, keep an eye towards this, all projects, not just in year 1, but in years 2 through 5, which some years we've spent more time on, some years we've just kind of considered them placeholders and we'll get to them. You're not approving that project at the time. But as we do try to realistically forecast our future expenditures 4, 5, and 6 years out, those projects are very much assumed to be happening and borrowed for. So it's kind of a compounding effect a little bit. But as we were just alluding to here, when we do close out projects or deauthorize projects, when there are excess bond proceeds, we can apply those, and that's less, to your question, Peter, that's less we have to borrow. Right now, that's not accounted for in our projections because we are assuming everything's going to be spent until the project's closed out. Right? Is that fair? Yeah. Okay, so with that, I think I'll turn this slide over, and you have a copy of this in front of you. It should be, you can skip past the first 2 projects, or first 2 spreadsheets. These that are kind of multicolored, we'll come back to these later. You'll recognize these as the same we looked at, I think briefly a few months ago, but also last year. These are active capital and CNR, capital non-recurring projects that are over $10,000 in remaining balance. And it just gives you a sense for the number of projects we still have. Some of those are ready to be closed out, and some of them you'll even see up here on this sheet as we close them out, or talk about closing them out tonight. But you'll see just the kind of 4 pages of projects we've approved over the last really 5 to even 10 years. And some of those may be relevant as we're talking about what, if any, additional projects we add here for fiscal 26's capital budget. So, Jim, take it away.
Yeah, so the on the screen, and I think you have a hard copy of that as well.
The
But
3rd page.
this is just over the last couple of months, I put together a list. I think there's over 45 projects here that I thought were relatively low-hanging fruit. They were fully spent or almost fully spent. I checked with the department heads. There hasn't been any activity in certainly over a year, let's say. There aren't any open purchase orders. There's no grants associated with them that haven't been audited or closed out. So this was just something I pulled as many projects as I could that I know and are comfortable with closing out at this point. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, you'll see that the lower right-hand corner, 1.62 million, that's how much, in effect, we are either going to deauthorize or there are excess proceeds in these projects that I can apply to other projects and therefore have to bond less. So we'll have a net positive impact reduction of our bond authorization by 1.6 million. There's more projects coming. I'm constantly going to be updating this. Some projects are tied to grants, so I really have to be careful before I make sure I want to close them out in case there's any grant refundings that have to happen, or the other way around, maybe they still owe us grant money. But I just thought this would take, a pretty good chunk off the table right off the get-go. And, I don't know if anybody has any questions on individual projects. These range anything from, when we buy a dump truck from 2 or 3 years ago and it takes a year or two to fit it out, this is maybe there's a few $1,000s left in the project. But there's a few bigger projects here too. And I don't know if we want to get into the individual projects, but
So Jim, the
Yeah.
1.6 million is just deauthorized, or it's deauthorized and excess bond proceeds?
so by nature of using excess bond proceeds to apply to another grant that I otherwise would have to bond, it has the same effect as a bond deauthorization on those projects I have funds to.
Okay.
It's almost like I'm bonding it,
Yeah,
and it would reduce that bond authorization.
right, but put another, and maybe this is a good place to explain. So let's just take the very, very first one. We won't go through all of them, but just so you see the concept here. Any of these, so let's say the very first one was vehicle and equipment replacement. It was a 2018 project. It had a remaining balance of $4,780. That was bonded, and so now that's excess bond proceeds that can be applied to another town project. In this case, we do have to keep town projects with town projects and Board of Ed projects with school projects, just the way we budget the debt service on those.
And sewer with sewer.
And sewer with sewer, thank you. And so when we have these, so these are all town to start, all of those sum up, all of these negatives you're seeing here, let's ignore the 2020 LED lighting upgrade. I'll talk about this one in a second. There was nothing borrowed, that's a deauthorization. But if you take the sum of all of these town projects that are negatives, that are showing the excess bond proceeds, what we're doing is, you'll see a positive down here for, we've selected the 2025 road improvement program of all of those total $683,307. That's taking all of those excess bond proceeds and applying them to this already approved project from last year, our road paving program on the town. That's $683,000 we don't have to borrow. We're going to apply all the sum of all of those bond proceeds. Similarly, picking a large project, an obvious one on the school side, is the 2 new elementary schools. Taking all of these school projects that are being closed out here with excess bond proceeds, that totals another $595,000. That's $595,000 we now wouldn't have to borrow. Still have the same authorization to spend, but you don't have to bond that amount of money, $600,000, for the 2 new elementary schools. Does that make sense? So, and again, I said I'd come back to it, but up here at the deauthorizing, you'll recall, or those that were on the council will recall, we did in 2019, which was the fiscal 20 budget, we did an LED lighting upgrade project for $242,000. But soon thereafter, Eversource offered an opportunity for us to do the 5-year no interest on bill financing. And so we just took that, as the council was interested in that, as the free lending opportunity there, and that just meant we've never spent this 242. Also, never bonded it, so it's really just a project on paper. That can be closed out, and as you see in that column E, simply deauthorized, and it's complete. The project's complete. All of these lights were done with that project. It just, the source of funding wasn't bonds. It ended up being on-bill financing with Eversource.
Can you go back down to the end again?
Yeah.
And to your point then, the line 104 and 106, the reason why those are separated out is because the excess bond proceeds of school projects was 595,
Yep.
and the excess town was 683.
Right.
So that's why those are being applied to school projects and a town project.
Yep.
And just to be clear on item 102, we are not replacing Don Walsh's floors.
No.
That is, that stands for district-wide floor.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah,
Very important clarification.
Could you switch that to DV? I can use it, Laura.
Exactly.
So just, maybe just quickly, was it going towards the bottom there on the schools? So that's the Cheshire Public School and Next Generation. Those are the two new schools we're building. I still have probably 20 million to bond on those projects. We bonded 40 million this year, 15 million over the last couple of years. Net of grants, but so that'll reduce, instead of, the 20 million I was planning on bonding, I can reduce that by that 595. And hopefully I won't even have to bond that much. I know we had some favorable news recently with the reimbursement rate. I'm still trying to work with Arcadis to figure out exactly how much that is and how that affects the cash flow. But I'm really excited about, hopefully that'll have a very favorable impact on those debt service projections, because that was one of the biggest projects.
So any other?
So, yeah, I have a
question?
couple. So the 1.6 million is everything. You're taking 683 and 595 and another 99.
And some other projects that had amounts that weren't needed and that we can deauthorize. So
Okay, you got ahead of my question, but so I
Yeah.
don't know what you answered just then. So let me go back again. The 1.6 million is
Yeah.
everything you've deauthorized, or it's excess bonds. It's total of everything.
Right.
Is that correct?
Exactly.
Of that, you're taking 683, 595, and 99 and putting it back into projects that are still active, we still want to go forward with, and we can use the money for those projects.
Right.
And what else is going on here? Is
So
there
the difference between that 595 and the 683 and the 1.6 million,
Right, because this is 1.2.
there's a handful of other projects that I can actually deauthorize the bond authorization, because I didn't bond it yet, and I won't have to.
So-
Like the 242,000.
Yeah, okay, so but that's still in the 1.6, so some of it is bonded, some of it is just deauthorized.
Correct.
But it's all one, it all adds up to 1.6.
It all adds up to, it's gonna reduce the amount that we're gonna
And,
need, in my projections, it'll reduce the amount that I project we'll have to bond.
and if we're not gonna go through these one by one, I'm assuming that the Board of Education or the facilities people and the various department heads have all agreed that they don't need this money, that we're not taking anything
I'm
away from someone
pretty
else.
comfortable with that. Most of these were, projects that were 4 or 5 years old. A lot of them were for fleet vehicles. Then I think I did send you this list at one point, and I didn't hear back, so
Yeah, there are some more that we could deauthorize. The big one is the underground oil tank replacement. There's a 2016.
yeah.
I don't know if that's included in the list, but that's 355,000. So Rich and I and Emily will just go through this list one more time. 'cause you are
Certainly, if there's
finalizing it
others
tonight.
that I can add on here, I will
Yeah.
be more than happy to do that. I know there are others that probably are worth looking at. I just, try to grab as much as I could in the period.
And then if those are bonded, then those would go towards the schools, and they would go
They'd
apply,
be
that would
reapplied, yep.
they'd be applied towards the school to reduce that overall bond authorization. That's the
Like
concept.
anything else that's deauthorized.
So are they excess or deauthorized?
Oh, that's, I don't know. Do you know?
The
Well,
one,
so this, I mean, the background on the underground oil tank replacements, we removed a lot of the underground oil tanks. And the only one that's left is Norton, and that one's gonna be taken care of under the school construction project. So this work is complete, that $355,129. If it's not there and deauthorized or excess bond proceeds, you can add it.
so
That's my
again, it
point.
almost doesn't really make any difference whether I bonded it or not. At the end of the day, it's gonna reduce what I'm gonna project I'll need going forward.
But you won't take that and put it towards, like, if it was
If I-
excess, if it was excess bond, you would take that and put it
And
towards
apply
another
it to
project.
another project that I otherwise
But you
wouldn't have
didn't
to
bond the underground tanks yet.
I'd have to look,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay, so that could be just a deauthorized,
Yeah.
okay,
One or the other.
okay.
And just taking a step back, so the amount that we are projecting for this first year of the capital budget is the 6.519, right? In this sheet?
Oh, you're on to the next sheet? Yeah. That is, on bonding, it would be total project 6519, that's
So
correct.
then what we're doing is,
Well, less there's $1 million of grants below that.
and then we're reducing that by the 1.3, 1.4.
So it's not directly correlated, well, you are in effect, but it's more likely, as we were showing, yeah, you are off the entire amount of debt service that would be associated with that, but not dollar for dollar to those projects, unless we chose to apply them specifically to this. I don't think we probably would, because we already have more than enough non-bonded existing projects to apply them to that are already approved projects at this point.
Are those being put towards the 25 project, right?
Mostly, I would say, yeah. We haven't borrowed much of 25 yet. The last issuance was mostly 24 projects in the schools.
And so on the road work, the $1.6 million is the balance that we've already bonded for through, that always goes through referendum, not referendum.
So that was the 25, those were the roads that we approved last year at referendum, this past November.
1.6.
Right.
And so we'll
So that's
we'll
at
reduce
least
the
a
money
year.
we need for that by almost $700,000, but we'll still be doing the same thing that we put.
It doesn't change that's why we wanted to talk about this tonight, just to make sure that distinction is clear. It doesn't change the amount of authorized project. We're still going to do the same amount of paving that you authorized last summer and that the voters voted on in November. The way we pay for it, instead of new bonds, will be partially new bonds, and right now $683,000 of old bonds. Does that
No,
kind of make
this-
sense?
This is great.
Yes, we don't have to bond $1 million, yeah, 1.6.
Right,
partly
so,
we-
you know, and I didn't put all the information down there, like, that project was probably 2.5
It's
or
2.4, because we combined that with
2.4
East
million.
Johnson.
So that, we have not yet spent, as of when I did this, 1.6 million.
Right.
Okay. So it was a little higher. Okay.
Yeah.
But this is a great
And
exercise.
I know that, you know, I didn't bond all that yet.
And
Just
part
like
of
the schools, I
yeah.
still have 20 million to
Right.
bond. That's why I applied it to that, knowing that I will.
And part of this effort is also just to kind of, I also reassure the council and understand that, you know, Jim's office tracks these very, very carefully, and we don't spend, once a project's complete, you know, part of our job is to make sure nothing else tries to get spent on that project that isn't applicable to the project. Sometimes there's residuals and other things that do apply, but in a perfect world, a capital project, first of all, should be a larger amount and a distinct effort. This is something we've talked about for a number of years. We've unfortunately have a very historically low minimum threshold for a capital project at $110,000 minimum. It's been that same for at least 30 years now, so 25 to 30 years.
At least, and it could be a lot longer than that.
The challenge with these now smaller and smaller, $100,000 is a smaller and smaller project, certainly compared to 20 or 30 years ago. And again, as we've talked about before, they're not supposed to be maintenance and repair type projects because at the end of the day, the last thing I'll just kind of always reiterate is when we borrow for a project, every $1 million we borrow, over 20 years, we're spending $400,000 in debt service, right? So
Based on an assumed 4% rate.
right, it's basically how it works.
Could
So
be more or less, but
the more, if you're bonding for maintenance every single year, you're kind of, and you do that for 20 years. You're unnecessarily financing something that you're spending on a recurring basis. So we're really trying to get away from that. A lot of this is just sort of setting the table for, this was a very difficult operating budget year, on the heels of a difficult operating budget year. I think we're all cognizant that, you know, we'd like to really have this be as minimal of an increase to our already existing portfolio of capital projects as we can. Things have changed even from when I put this budget together in February, and so you'll see on the next few charts when we start to look at year one projects, we have what was recommended on March 10th, but what you ultimately adopt, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume it's going to be significantly lower number of projects. We'll still go through the exercise, of course, of trying to justify those and where they slide out in future years, but I think we need to take a hard look at some of these projects we're adding on, because we have so many already on the books, and it's just the fiscal reality we're facing right now. Can't really afford to add too much more debt service. All right, with that, any other questions on this page? Thank you to Jim
So
for a lot
I'll
of
be
work on
following up for a regular council meeting at some point. I believe the bond council's gonna have to draft a resolution for you to deauthorize anything. There's a handful of deauthorizations there. The excess bond proceeds, it's an automatic thing. I don't need to get your approval on that. But there will be some follow-up resolutions.
When you get the rest of the BOEs on there, can you send that to us?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it's going to change dramatically.
Yeah.
Dramatically, right?
Then I'll have to connect with you.
It'll change a little.
Okay, so again, tonight the theme of tonight is the education budget. So I think if you're okay, we'll transition over to that at this time, and happy to go back, take these home, of course, and read through them. If you have any questions on them, either now or at the next meeting, let me
There
know.
might be another slide too there, Sean, later.
Go back to the, oh yeah, sure. Which one? Oh, I showed it. I had it at the bottom.
Works, okay. We have copies
Andrew.
that we will pass around. While we're doing that, I'll just say hello and thanks for having us. Hope everybody's doing well. You know me, I'm Vin Massiana. I think everybody's met Emily Taylor, our Assistant Chief Operating Officer, soon to be the Chief Operating Officer, subject to the board's approval. Jeff Solon, our School Superintendent. Good evening. And Rich Clavette, our Director of Facility Services. So Emily and I will be tag teaming this initial presentation, and Rich Clavette is here certainly for technical, and detailed questions that Emily and I can't answer. So I'm going to kick it off. We'll try and keep the presentation brief, but there are some important points that we would like to make this evening as we proceed. So I will jump right in. So the first slide here, for those members of the council who've been on the council for a while know that these are our current buildings, and you can see they vary in age from, our youngest at this point, Highlands, at 54 years, and our oldest building still operating is Humiston School and the Board of Ed at 113 years. The column on the far right, I always like to point out that the number of events, besides being used as schools, before and after school is significant. So our facilities are not used just as schools. They are used as community centers and places that hold events, mostly for Cheshire organizations, but sometimes we do rent our facilities to non-Cheshire organizations. Council knows they did approve, and the voters at referendum approved the two new schools, New Norton and New Barnum Elementary. Those will be open in the following school year, so September 8th of 2026, those two new schools will be open. And so this is what our school building profile will look like starting in 26, 27. Those three schools, or those three buildings at the bottom will no longer be serving as schools. Norton Elementary will be demolished in place. However, the Chapman and Darcy school buildings will remain. When we get to talk about next year's operating budget, next March or April, we will have to talk about the carrying costs for those two buildings. They'll have to be budgeted, so either on the board side or on the town side, there will be continuing operating costs. Obviously, they'll be minimized, but we still have to heat the building to make sure that the pipes don't freeze and mow the lawns so that the neighbors don't see unsightly, properties. So I know that's a question that the council's aware of what to do with those buildings, but, we'll hit that again when we do our operating budget. Very high level, this is the overall 5-year capital plan that was approved by the Board of Education. It's $62.625 million. The categories that you see there, if you just look at them quickly, grounds and exterior improvements, HVAC improvements, interior building improvements. There's nothing on that list that is anything outside of what you would want to do to maintain your buildings, keep them in good repair, keep them safe for students and users of those buildings. If I take that same board's approval at $62.6 million, this shows a breakdown by school or district-wide projects. So, not surprisingly, our larger buildings, Cheshire High School, Dodd Middle School, those have some of the largest amounts that's being requested for capital over those 5 years. The key thing in this particular slide is that there is no funding for Chapman. We know that school's closing. There is none for Norton or Darcy. Those two buildings are closing. However, there is also no capital being requested for central office and Humiston building. And there are capital needs that we will eventually get to. The reason that we left it off is because, there is phase 2 of a, school modernization plan that the board and the town council will need to get to. So, we don't have any capital requests right now, but looking long term, certainly if that building stays, it will need a new roof. It's a slate roof. And there are some other projects that we would certainly want to get to if that building is being retained and used for the future. So
Is the Doolittle one, is that air conditioning? Is that what the big?
So Doolittle has in it air conditioning, windows, roof replacement. Those are the three biggies, and we're going to come back to that when Emily talks about the energy performance contract, that we're going to try and bundle those if we can into that contract. So I'm jumping the gun here, but anything we do under the energy performance contract will come out of the capital budget over that 5-year period. And Emily did some really nice handouts with color coding so that you can see that. So council knows that the 5-year capital plan, years 2 through 5, there's no dollars being approved, but year 1, there are dollars being approved. I do want to point out that what you're seeing here is a narrowed down and revised scope of year 1. It's different than what the Board of Ed approved. The Board of Ed approved about $5.04 million. I know that Sean Kimball, when he looked at the capital request in year 1, he recommended some reductions. Ours are a little bit different than what Sean is recommending, but we're presenting this because we're aware that the council is looking to try and keep the amount of capital that's being funded this year as low as possible. And we think this is as low as reasonably possible, and we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. And so to give you a little bit more flavor of these, I'm going to have Emily kind of talk through, each of these projects with, Rich providing, any additional information that you need.
Great. So we've narrowed it down to 5, I think, really critical projects that you can see here are mostly life safety issues. Starting with if you look at the largest project, it's actually at the bottom for the fire alarm control system, and that is at Cheshire High School. That is a big one. There are some pretty significant replacements that are needed, and we've had design work that I think was just completed, Rich, for this project. So this is replacing some antiquated equipment. Rich, I don't know if you want to...
For fire alarm control?
Yes, so the 1.1 million.
So that's a Cheshire High School fire alarm control, brand new, 1993. So the unfortunate part of that is, I mean, we do a good job, my staff does a good job in maintaining this equipment, so we get some good longevity and life cycle counts out of them. Unfortunately, this specific notifier fire alarm control system is antiquated, so there are no spare parts. So we've had a number of circuit board panels that have failed in the last 2 years. We've had to send them out to custom electronic shops to have them try to rebuild. So we're kind of like on the end of that. The other thing is that our code compliance is dated 1993. So currently today we have no horn strobes in each of the classrooms, which today is required by an FPA code. And there's a number of coverage issues that we have. We just did Dodd Middle School last winter. We completed it in June of last year. So that is currently the only school we have in the district that is 100% code compliant. So, but the high school is the largest of all the district schools, only because of square footage.
And that cost estimate of $1.1 million, is that sound based on the?
So that was a rough order of magnitude estimate. We did have Salomon and Associates is currently wrapping up the final design, and they did an estimate of cost for that specific project, and it came in at 1.2, and that was including a 5% contingency and things of that nature. But I think in the bid market, we could probably do better than that 1.1.
The 80,000 was design, is that what?
We had 80,000 seed money for design.
So,
Yeah.
so they've already done that work?
Yes,
And this
correct.
is where you came up with that?
By the end of the summer, I'll have 100% a bid set.
Now, this doesn't include sprinkler heads. Can I just tell you?
Strictly fire alarm.
Because the other one for district-wide was
Right.
sprinkler heads, but this is just
Those
fire
are
alarm.
two separate systems, yes. Strictly smokes, strobes, annunciators.
So there will be more around the school than there are
Correct.
now, and they're higher tech.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers, but say there's 150 devices today. By the time we're code compliant and have 100% coverage, that'll be triple that amount of devices.
So the other heavy hitter you can see there is the $800,000 for the south parking lot reconfiguration. There was previous design work money allocated for this project, which Rich and his team have done the design work with L'Oreal. This one, again, was requested in previous years. You can see that of the 5 projects here, the 3 white ones are ones that we've requested previous funding for but have not gotten it, and then the 2 blue projects are new requests, one of which is the fire sprinkler system, the other being some electrical service replacement at Highland.
You explain the south parking lot, is that the one right next to the school, right outside the cafeteria doors?
By the loading dock?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the south, it's not the one that goes across.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that loading dock, just if you remember, the loading dock was failing, and that part of this project will replace that. We
Correct.
shored it up to get us through, but
So the scope of the design includes that whole frontage from the loading dock. It reconfigures that, makes the loading dock wider, and then reconfigures the parking lot that goes all the way west along the boys' gym. So it reconfigures that lot, makes it bigger. I think we add like 6 more parking spaces plus reconfigure stormwater, because currently that whole parking lot is handled by a dry well, which doesn't work very well. No pun intended there.
And the design work has already been done on that
The
too?
design is 100%, yeah, I have bid set for it in my
And the
possession.
access, you were talking at one point, access, revised access to the locker rooms, is that part of this too? ramps and things like that.
That's already taken care of.
That's already been
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
So this is just, and the parking lot where the students park beyond the access drive, that's not in this at all.
That's correct.
Is
That's
that-
a whole nother, that's a whole nother project.
Okay.
Less complicated, but a lot more square footage.
Yeah, okay.
And even at the top with the elementary school playground equipment replacement, that is also a life safety compliance issue. You know, we have older playgrounds. They do get inspected every year, but our playgrounds are older, and making them more ADA accessible and also compliant is a major factor in putting this in our top 5 requests.
This doesn't include, because the new schools are under the new school budget, so that's,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so this is just for 2 schools.
Yes.
Okay.
Just one comment on playgrounds. In the past, we haven't really been diligent about funding them, and if you have any experience with playgrounds, just a piece of equipment is outrageously expensive. A simple piece of equipment, I mean, we have a town playground here, so we're well aware of what the cost is, but single pieces of equipment range anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000. There's an important design component that's required, and then as much as the utilization of the town playground, all the schools' playgrounds get the same amount of use from the public, both in town and from out of town. Darcy is huge. That's going to be going away, so that'll be an interesting dichotomy to see where they move to that. But Darcy's very popular, Highland is very popular, and Norton is very popular. So if you drive by on the weekends, there's always a bunch of people utilizing those playgrounds, which is fine. That's what they're there for. But they do need to be upgraded.
This doesn't include any working on the fields themselves or anything, it's just equipment strictly.
Well, it would be equipment plus, doing all the pads, the surrounding area, whatever the footprint of what constitutes a playground,
Because
not an athletic field.
250 sounds like, based on what you said, it sounds like
That's
about
not-
3 or
yeah,
4
that's-
pieces of equipment.
It's the start of renovating, like say, a Doolittle playground.
Is there any of the equipment at Chapman or Norton that is in decent condition that could be used?
So the problem with playground equipment is there's a liability component. So it has to be a certified installation. No one will certify installation of used equipment.
Okay.
Whether that's illegal, obviously it is a liability issue, but I think it's also a way for suppliers to get out of that, We'll provide you with brand new, but not with used, so. We've been down that road with Highland already.
Yep.
So also in your packet, you have a blue labeled document that shows you the 5-year outlay for these projects. So like Don, you mentioned $250 for the elementary school playground in year 1, but that's actually over the course of the 5 years, we've allocated $500,000 to that project. So you can kind of see how much everything costs.
Another 3 pieces.
So overall, these projects over 5 years total $3.1 million, but we're allocating $2.5 in the first year.
Yeah, and just to pick up on something Sean said earlier, so, it is a request for $250 this year, we'd like $500,000. We would ask for all $500,000 in year 1, but we know that the reality of how we've budgeted for capital improvements in the past is multi-year to get a project done. So we're trying to be sensitive when we present our capital budget to the board and then to the town council to that fact. When you look at our capital budgets, window replacements are a good example. We've been doing the high school window replacements for probably 10 years, doing $250,000 to $500,000 at a time. Not the most efficient way to do a project, but it's trying to, accommodate how we've been funding them in the past. If that changes, then.
Do you have a lifespan on playground equipment? I mean, is it 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20? Is it
Yeah, I think it's usually 15.
15? So, I mean, it's almost something that you're probably going to have to build in every few years, a couple $100,000, because as it goes, I mean, yeah, just to keep it going.
Yeah,
Well, we'll
it's-
have 2 brand new ones.
Yes.
but, obviously in 26.
But the other 2 will be the ones.
Yeah.
And then if phase 2, thinking out loud, if phase 2 comes to fruition in, say, 5 years or so, renovating the playgrounds would be part of the renovation of that Doolittle. You include that as part of the scope and get some economy there.
Okay, so that's the, if there are no further questions, we'll just keep moving on. That's the 2.5 million we're recommending out of the board's 5.04 million approved. And this, we don't have to go through this, but these are the remaining 2.5 million that we're saying the board approved that will defer. And what that means is we're moving it into years 2 through 5. Okay, so those, we're not requesting funding this evening for those, just the 2.5 million on the previous slide. So this slide is a history, dating back to 2013-14 of the board's request and the town council approval. And you could see that overall, over that period of time, the council has approved 77% of the dollars. And you see that there are some years that the board's request was rather light. Last year, the council approved 1.5 million, but the prior 2 years we were a little over $3 million there in 23, 4, and 22, 3 were 2.5 million. I mean, realistically, we probably should be investing about $3 million per year in capital just to keep up on the maintenance. So we are a little bit light last year, but I just point that out, and that is a complaint. I understand that there's fiscal realities to funding, but that is the 1 year approval history. Obviously, the 5-year approval history is a lot higher than 77%, but we only fund year 1 each time, so that's the purpose of showing you that. Now we're going to talk a little bit, Emily will explain what this is referring to and why we think it's important.
So we have the energy performance contract, which we've talked about a bit, but these could offset some of the projects that we have listed in the capital plan to the tune of $11.6 million, which is 19% of the overall capital budget. So these are included in our request, but if we move forward with the energy performance contract with Johnson Controls, these are where you can see some of the offsets. So none in year 1 because we took everything out that could be considered an EPC project. But you can see anything in green is where you're getting the potential offset for the 5-year total, with that being $11.6 million that could be offset by the energy performance contract, and the remaining $50.9 million that would be requesting through the capital planning process. If you want more detail, there's this green sheet that has all of the things that are flagged as an energy performance contract. These are included in the larger plan. They're denoted with like a little leaf next to it, but this just pulls them out specifically so you can see year by year every project that's included. It's also in the PowerPoint. It's just a little easier to read in this document. But this includes the Doolittle potential air conditioning project, which is $7 million out of the $11 million that we were talking about earlier for Doolittle. So it represents a pretty significant part of the Doolittle request for capital projects over the next 5 years. So, and I believe that is the largest of the potential EPC offsets is the Doolittle air conditioning project, but there are also some pretty other significant ones, including some HVAC improvements at Cheshire High School for $850,000. And then some pneumatic controls throughout the district for $500,000.
Yeah, I will add to that. So the status of the energy performance contract, the council remembers that Johnson Controls was appointed. They're working diligently. They are trying to expedite a lot of the solar because of the one big beautiful bill act that did pass the Senate today. There's going to be reductions to the investment tax credits for solar, and we won't lose them if we can approve a contract and begin work very quickly. So that request is going to be coming to the council, I believe. Now, we don't know the details of when those reductions are gonna take place for sure yet. When the bill is actually published, or once the House passes it and it's published, then we'll know how fast we need to go. But those investment tax credits are very significant, and it would be a shame to lose them if we were gonna go forward with the energy performance contract. And Johnson Controls has explained that they'll do this early portion as part of the total contract. So we would obviously have to work with council, our town attorney, and Johnson Controls to craft a contract that makes sense, that everybody is comfortable with, but it would still be part of an energy performance contract where the energy savings are guaranteed by Johnson Controls. So I just wanted to put that out there just so that the council is aware while we have the opportunity. But these are some significant projects. I'm not sure that this list is final either. There may be additional conservation measures that will be included above and beyond. This was based on their preliminary list, so this will get refined a bit further.
Are there other projects besides solar that could potentially be at risk that would need to be expedited as well?
Solar seems to be the one that would be phased out quickly under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So that's why Johnson Control is focusing on that. And that's just one portion of the incentives that we would get for doing an energy performance contract. There's a state construction grant that is also available. I'm not sure how much overlap will be allowed to take advantage of. And there's also incentives from Eversource. So all those incentives, if we can include the investment tax credit, gives us opportunities to take a project like upgrading Doolittle to HVAC and making that possible under the energy performance contract, because that project has probably got a 25-year payback versus some of the solar with the incentives. Johnson Controls was showing us preliminary numbers that with incentives, the potential payback for solar is 6 to 7 years, which is quite amazing, and we would want to take advantage of that if we could. So that will continue to come through the working group, which Fiona is a member of that working group.
So then before you go further, I want to understand something, just not on energy performance, just in general.
Yeah.
You said there's a 5-year capital expectation of $62.6 million. This shows in blue the other capital projects, which I assume makes up the $62.6 million. They don't add up to 60, so I don't know what that looks like. But regardless, I mean, you're looking for 10 million or 11 million next year in capital, even though we're at 2.5 this year and 15 million the following. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
I mean,
John, the way what happens is every year we just
push things out,
move things to the right. That's the reality. So yeah, if we take that whole capital need, 60, let's just run numbers, say it's $60 million. It's important that we, as a district and a fiscal authority, understand what's out there in terms of our, maintenance needs. If we did a 10-year capital plan, we could spread that out more, but we do 5 years, and so those are placeholders. We do need to get to those things, and every year when we come before the board and the council, we say, okay, these are what we have to have in year one, and then there's this process that we're going through where the council determines, well, fiscally we'd like to, keep this year low because we know that the grand list growth is not what it's going to be a couple of years from now.
but I mean, if this is correct, you're looking at a $50 million expenditure in year 5, technically, according to this.
Right. Yeah, if you look at each of the projects, that's
And
what's out
how come
there.
this adds up to more than the 62? Because each one is inflated?
The
year
last
after
column on the right is the 5-year total. So that's 62.625. If you're looking at that adds
Oh,
up.
that's year 5,
Yes,
okay,
so
yeah,
the
year
one
5
column
is
to the left,
15
yes.
15 million, I misread that, okay, so that's, okay. less scary.
But the,
And it's probably looked that way for 20 years too, John. Like,
No,
we try and prioritize year one, and then just it's almost more informative in the other years. The only elements that tend to carry year over year are when we chunk a large project. Something like the Cheshire High School window replacement comes to mind, where we're clipping 250,000 in windows just annually. Kind of like Don said earlier, trying to budget it out over a long period of time because the district has a lot of windows that are, 50 years old or something.
I guess next we're going to hear more about the energy performance contract, but that's something that will that be part of the capital budget? We don't know yet.
Well,
It impacts the
it
capital
shouldn't
budget.
be,
Shouldn't be.
because the contract itself is a tax-free lease,
Okay.
so it wouldn't have to be bonded, and now, obviously our town attorney has to review the contract, but the way it works is, if we have a 15-year or a 20-year contract in which we're saving $700,000 per year in energy savings, that energy savings is what pays the lease payment over those 15 years. So we get the infrastructure work done. There's no out-of-pocket outlay because you're saving the energy to pay for the contract.
Okay. And if we don't approve it, then there's going to be a whole different look to this.
The different look is, without
The
green
51
charts on
becomes
there,
a lot
yeah.
bigger number.
Yeah, that all turns to blue
Right.
instead of, the green offset. So that whole, on the far right is the 5-year total, that would all be
So it's like
funded through capital.
$24 million additional. Looks like the green.
And Johnson bears the risk on this too, so
Yeah,
if they
right,
don't,
that
if
they-
they don't,
if we
if
don't-
this does not come to fruition.
Yeah, if we don't hit
Johnson
those
bears the
numbers,
risk.
they will
They,
cover it.
they have to pay us a check.
Right, if they say that the energy savings will be $700,000 a year, and we get our bills, and it's $650,000, they literally write us a check for $50,000. They will never do that.
Exactly.
They will plan this so
That's
that
how,
we do realize
that's how
those energy
confident they are.
savings. But listen, it works for the town because, we don't have to, lay out those funds and bond the work, and we can get the infrastructure improvements done more quickly. So there'll be more discussion on that.
Definitely.
And the plan includes town buildings as well.
What was that?
The plan includes town buildings as well, not that graph, it's only Board of Ed, but the energy performance contract includes the town side as well.
All right. So I'm going to move really into the last couple of points to make. So this is shifting gears here for a moment. This is our operating budget for maintenance and operations. So on the far right, you see the 20 in green, the 20, 25, 26 approved. $4.2 million is approved in this year's operating budget for maintenance and operations. If you look at that pie chart, however, that's not just money for repairs. The $2,018,000 is what we call maintenance and repair, but the cleaning contract alone is $860,000 of that $2 million. So that leaves about $1.2 million for, repairs, including, payments to vendors who have to come in to do repairs when we can. 1.8 million of that 4.2 million is what we pay for electricity and to heat the schools, as well as to pay, water and garbage pickup. That's what's included there. And then maintenance, supply and maintenance and repair equipment. You could see, those are a smaller percentage of the budget. But it's very important to point out that, if we've got about $1.2 million, just rounding it off, for building repairs in our operating budget, the capital budget is an important component of
the long-term improvements to our buildings. So I know it's obvious, but I just wanted to point that out. We do still have the maintenance safety net. The council had in the past appropriated several times. We've added to this maintenance fund, but you can see on the far right side, there is $233,000 in that maintenance safety net fund. The way that fund works is if we need to make a repair and we don't have operating budgets, we come to the council and we get approval for that money to be dispersed. And you can see we haven't used it in a number of years, so it's good for us to have that. It's not bonded, it's CNR, so there's no interest cost. And then this is some of this year's highlights. So the left side that's Chapman roof. We discovered a leak in the building one morning, and lo and behold, part of the roof had come off in the corner of the building. So that was one of our repair costs. That middle one is Doolittle. If you see on the right side there, looks like there's a hole in the wall that our building maintainer had to chip through that cinder block to get to the leak that was supplying that's hot water
Heating
system,
hot water.
right? Heating hot water.
Black mold.
On the top right and the bottom right, those were black water backups, one at Highland on the top and one at the Board of Ed. So those are some of the things that our operating budget goes to fund. And here, a much prettier picture. These are some of the capital funds that the town council approved in previous years. So up at the top, those top three are the West Gym lockers that were made. First of all, they're now ADA compliant, which they weren't. And those lockers were quite dated. So you could see, all along that top, and then the bottom right, those are the bathrooms and shower. I mean, just came out terrific. And that was an important project that was on our capital list for quite a few years. Bottom left is the replacement of the freezer and the cooler at Cheshire High School. That equipment was really dated as well. And then that middle is the boiler at one of the two boilers at the Dodd Park Place, I think.
That was a Park Place?
Yeah, which were replaced last year. So those were our capital projects completed in 2024. We've got a few more that are happening this summer. And I like to share those pictures because it's a way for you to see the money that you approve, is an investment in our buildings. Those lockers, unless we do something with the high school, will serve us for a lot of years, as will that, boiler at Dodd and that refrigeration equipment at the high school. So we do thank you for the approvals that you give us. We try to use the money wisely. And with that, that concludes our presentation portion of this evening. So if there's questions on the handouts or anything else, we'll be glad to address them. And if you're ready to approve tonight, we're good with that.
Finn, of the 15 million that was in year 5, did I hear you say that some of that may be beyond year 5, but it just kind of gets moved into year 5?
Yes.
So one of the things that I know Sean and Jim have been doing is any of the stuff that's 6 to 10 years to put it into a future rather than move it into year 5, because it does skew the projections that Jim does for debt service over the 5 years. If always in that 5 years we're including stuff that may be 6 to 10 years out. So is there the ability to do a kind of a future projects?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we could certainly do that. I think it's a good idea. The reason that we do include it within the 5 years is That's the way we've always done it
Yeah.
here. And I don't, these are placeholder items. They're bookmarked because we know these are items that eventually we will have to do. Maybe not within the 5 years, maybe, if we go 5-year capital plan and then a 5+ year plan.
Yeah, I saw that.
Kind of bookmark that and
So-
review it periodically. I think it would be helpful, both fiscally, but also, to keep everybody aware of our pending, maintenance items.
Yeah.
So just on that note, yeah, as Peter said, we started to, and in your packets you have, but I'll put them up on the screen, these 3 last pages that are all kind of traditionally vertical pages. One is the summary of all of the first year projects. As proposed, you'll see here there's a column for as proposed on March 10th, and then kind of an updated number, so you can go along kind of one by one as we start to get into the town projects too and make some modifications there. You'll see these are the education projects Vin referenced, the ones that I had recommended advancing. What you saw tonight is a little different, so we can update that for however you'd like, or add the other projects if you'd like to see it in the same form as you saw. So this was a list of bonded projects. There's also the next tab over is a list of CNR projects. Same exercise, but again, as we said before, these are not bonded projects, they're self-funded, although do keep in mind, we significantly lowered our CNR appropriation this year in the operating budget, so we will need to make some corresponding adjustments here, or recognize that we'll be bonding for some of those traditional CNR projects, so that if we don't reduce that. And then the last tab is to the point we were just making, new this year, but for the reasons that I was outlining earlier and that Ben was just sort of echoing there, that some of these projects they've kicked around. I mean, the North End Fire Station is one that's probably been on the 5-year plan for 15 years plus. But once we have a real plan to do something within the next 4 to 5 years, it makes sense to have it incorporated so we can realistically project our borrowing costs and our operational costs and everything else. But as things stand right now, I took a first stab at taking some of the projects that are on the current plan that I don't see realistically happening in the next 5 years. And so you'll see in the out years there was, when we get to WPCD, there was a facilities upgrade of the entire treatment plant at $20 million as a placeholder. There's a force main rehabilitation. Again, we'll talk about some of these conceptual projects when we do public works. The one that I put on from education was, I think, in year 5, which was the little over 10 million for the sports complex renovation at CHS. So I think that was year 5, I think, right? So that's 10 of the 15 million you saw in year 5. Again, ultimately up to the council. I saw that as one we haven't really dove into in great depth yet, but also just may not, based on the fiscal realities, be one we're able to do in the next 4 years. Again, an open question, but one that might be appropriate for let's hold that for what I'm calling projects for future consideration, years 6 and further. So we can add to this, we can take from this, we can move things back into the 5-year plan. I do think that will help us a little more realistically calibrate the 5-year projection away from, again, Jim, if it's on the 5-year plan, he's assuming we're doing it and we're borrowing for it.
I have to admit, it's gotten more skewed in recent years because of the amounts are larger and there's more of them as far as projects that are more placeholder.
Right. So again, this was just a first year. It already totaled 45 million. That's just a first stab that I did a couple weeks ago as we were trying to come up with a way. And we could print this list in our final budget document too, but just not include those projects in our actual adopted 5-year capital plan. Just keep a running list of future considerations.
Yeah, and we go back and look at this stuff on an annual basis anyway, and Emily can certainly go through and next year, go look at the 6 to 10 and maybe even beyond if it's on the radar, and move what you think is appropriate into year 5 as everything shifts down the line. So I think it gives us a better idea of what the long range debt looks like, at least on a 5-year snapshot, rather than including stuff that we're likely not going to do in 5 years.
Can I ask a question? So there's 2 things, Sean. One is, why of all the education-related capital expenditures that are budgeted, did you take that one out and put it into this format, to this? And before you do that, the other question is, can we really wait until year 5 to deal with the high school field, the existing field? I know this complex is, as I read it, is much more comprehensive, where you're looking at doing a lot of other things, but can that wait that long?
Some portions can't, and, you know, I know, like, if we look at just the stadium seating, you know, I would probably push to expedite that, but Rich, I know you're
And
more
the turf
familiar
and
with
the
the
turf and
plan.
the track can make it 5 more years?
No.
But that's not,
The
that's a separate
synthetic, that's not
That's
part of
different.
that.
That's already
Yeah.
in the 5-year plan.
Yeah,
That's
the
not-
synthetic turf field replacement,
That's part
I
of
didn't see it, where is that, where
No,
is
that
in
is
your-
part of the 10 million.
yeah, but we've got it here.
Yeah, you have it there, that's what I'm
It's a
saying, it's
separate
there.
line item.
Yeah, that part,
Separate
yeah,
line
yeah.
item.
But it's
You
in
could take
year
that.
5 though.
Not
In
the,
there.
not the synthetic turf
I didn't
replacement.
see it, where is it?
Yeah.
I looked for it, I thought it was in year 5. I looked for it quick just now.
I want to say it's either this year or next, it's, well, we took it
Can't
out
be
this
this
year,
year,
it's
right?
next year.
Because-
Yeah, it's year 2, 600,000.
So it's in year 2.
Yeah.
Row
So that 10
16.
million is not that, that's a much more comprehensive.
Yeah, that includes lighting, stadium seating.
Okay.
Yeah, that,
Okay,
That would be a full-
At least that answers that question. I was worried about the turf lasting 5 more years. And someone.
we
you know,
gotta
not
get to
getting
that
hurt,
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Sean, why did you take that out of, because that's in their budget as well, so why is that one here as opposed to other things then?
I mean, simply, again, it was a first stab at it, it was also significantly the largest project.
Okay.
It was new to year 5, new to the entire 5-year plan, and it was 2/3 of the year 5 ask, so it felt like an eligible candidate to move out.
Okay.
Could certainly bring it back in if you guys would like.
I'm just curious, no, I was curious why that one, okay.
It's clearly size, but I would have done the same thing. If you would have asked me, you know, I would have, maybe not the whole 10 million, because there may be portions that we would want to keep in that 5-year window, but I think this makes sense to me. We're not gonna fund something, but I want it in the capital plan, you know, as a placeholder. This is a good way to do it, so that we keep talking it through and you know, either move stuff in or move stuff out. And if you don't have to show it as, you know, something that's a liability, that helps the financials. Better than what we've been doing.
The playground renovation is the 250, is a lot of that, would a lot of that go to the change to the crumb rubber, or is it more of the equipment? Or the equipment cost?
That's just an estimate. There's no real design that's really attributed to that 250,000.
Okay.
In essence, part of that money would have to go into a design, and whether we selected, you know, engineered chips or crumb rubber or poured in place, you know, we'd have to make that determination based on cost.
It's not gonna, I agree, it's not gonna go that far.
No, it's just,
You'll be,
you could,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the crumb rubber is much more expensive, but you don't have to replace it, you know, with the engineered, you know, fibers every year, so over the long run, you know, it's probably break even. The crumb rubber is nicer, but that would be part of, you know, as we go and get a real design and a cost estimate, we'll refine that.
You'll probably have to assess all your facilities and do a priority thing to spend that money, otherwise, as to what's the worst, what's the most egregious in terms of not accessible, et cetera.
We're used to that worst first basis. That's how we've done flooring, windows,
Yeah.
masonry, sidewalks.
We appreciate it.
So as I look at this, I mean, the $2.5 million that you're looking for, 1.9 sounds like it would have to go to a referendum. I get concerned about, especially with the tax bills, forgetting that it's 1.9 million, and I don't know if there's a way that, how we're gonna do that, but we normally put it together, right? Or would we do those two separate? 1.1, would we do the two school ones, the 1.1 million for the fire safety?
They would normally be separate unless they were
So we'd do two
similar,
separate ones.
if there's parts of the same project or something, that's not even
Okay.
unrelated.
So is that right? We'd be looking at two separate referendum
Two separate,
questions?
yeah,
The 1.1 or 1.2, whatever that number turns out to be in the 800.
Anything else?
Just quick, on the two new requests, those are not moving up in years, those are actually just straight out,
Things that came
up
to our attention that we believe we have to deal with in this next capital budget year.
Right, I just wanted to make sure they're not being shifted up, they're just being added.
Yes. And that's why we tried color coding that way over the years so that, you know which projects have moved in year over year and the ones that, hit the radar that you have to deal with.
Right.
Can I ask just about the paving of the south lot? It includes fixing the loading dock too. Is there a way that could be done in 2 phases at all, or?
Certainly can.
I'm just thinking, if you can fix the loading dock first, and then, 1 year, and then the next year you do the paving, it may be 400 and 400, it's a little bit easier to deal with, but I don't know the loading dock sounds like it needs fixing first.
Replacement,
Yeah, replacement, so.
If you broke that into that, would they aggregate to a referendum, or were they different enough projects that you could do 400?
One's paving and one's replacement.
Probably that sounds like you could probably break them up.
Would you be able to get what the cost to do one and the paving separately, so we can just see what those numbers are?
Yeah, we have an opinion of probable cost. It's a year old, but I should be able to get the price for each.
Yeah, I'd be more comfortable bringing a fire sprinkler item as to referendum than a paving item to
Yeah.
referendum.
Public safety is a.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll respond and let, Sean and the council know.
Just to
I'm not sure the
recap,
1.5 million is a bad number, so maybe there's another project that could be advanced if you split that in half or something, because I think you're being very reasonable at the 1.5, and considering that there's so much over time that we have to deal with, so.
I was just gonna recap quick the punch list for you guys. We're gonna look at the active projects about what could be shelved or closed out. We're going to look at the 6 through 10, let's call it, list. And we'll get you that information on the split quotes on those, right? Is there anything else that you guys were looking for that we could help provide?
That, the information for Jim on what else he might add to his list.
Yeah, that's the first one, yeah.
Or is that you referring to?
Yeah, sorry.
Jim is gonna call me tomorrow morning.
Yeah, right.
Might call you tonight.
Oil tanks?
Well, the oil tank is a nice example of the deferred.
Yeah.
Something that you're able to take off because of the
Yeah,
school
just, and to make sure you're comfortable with what I had on there.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, I didn't take anything that like it was being used all along.
Yep.
Sean, where you wanna go?
Other
than home, yeah.
The Arctic?
It's better in here now.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you to Public Works for fixing
Yeah.
it. I mean, really, it's up to you if you want to dive into. I mean, we've laid a lot out. I know, pretty introductory. I don't want to overwhelm folks either. I don't want to spend time, going back. Last year when we did this effort, we also went through those existing capital projects that we have approved in the last few years. You have those in front of you as well. I have them up on the screen. Again, that's, I think, at times a good exploratory effort to see if some of these are still projects that are priorities. Some of them are 8, 9, 10 years old. And at some point, doesn't have to be tonight, but I think we do need to kind of, decide if some of these are going to, if they're eligible candidates. They're not on Jim's list yet, but things that could be closed out or might even apply to some of these projects. Like I know there's one I just happened to highlight. I don't know, these predate me. There's one in 2016 called CHS Building Exterior Deficiencies. I don't know what that was for. It was approved in 2015, so it's 10 years ago. But that has $156,000 still in it. So there's an effort that we can do, again, and we can continue to work with at the staff level. We don't have to do this here at a council meeting necessarily, but I do think we need to take a close look at some of those older projects. There's no doubt, I think some of the newer projects are priorities. They're today priorities. You did see on Jim's list, I think the one we didn't really talk about yet, but the 2014 Science Lab project was an example. I know we've talked about with Vinny recently. The project was held off during, I think, the beginning of school modernization efforts.
Yeah.
But Jim's list included deauthorizing and closing out that Science Lab project because it was never started from 2014. So
Just to answer that question though, the CHS building exterior deficiencies, so those are the ADA compliance items that were identified when CHRO did a review in 2009. So we still have some exterior improvements that we'll need to make to close out that list. And the top two items,
that's what the first two are too.
the
yeah.
first two, those are also code compliance items. Again, we didn't borrow the money for that, but.
We did with the high school project though, the science labs.
Yeah, okay, that one, Jim and I talked about, so that.
But
And I don't know, I'd have to double check whether we borrowed or, maybe we did borrow some. in
Yeah, we
anticipation of
never got
spending.
that far with the project. And Jim and I always talk every year, but
Right.
before he does his borrowings. But those top two are also code compliant. The reason I didn't want to take them off is if we ever get cited, that we'll have a place to go to. But, if it helps, I would just have to come back to the council and say, we've got to deal with this code compliance issue.
Totally, yeah. Totally understand. And
Which almost makes sense to me, to start it fresh, because 2001,
Yeah, we've talked about this.
Well, I hate to wait until we get
Years.
cited for things.
Yeah, right.
I would like to probably maybe relook at this stuff and say, okay, what do we still need to do?
Can we
And
do it?
because are those numbers still even accurate?
Those numbers would just get us design work. I mean,
Yeah, well, that's what, so it's almost pointless to have those up there right now until we, I don't wanna wait till we get cited, that's,
right.
yeah,
Well, we know that the Humiston building is not ADA compliant.
well, yes.
So,
That means,
it doesn't even necessarily, I don't wanna wait till we get cited either, but it's part of a,
yeah,
multi-million
that
dollar-
200,000 is
That's a
not near.
multi-million-dollar project,
Yeah.
it's a building in the historic district.
Yep.
So, if we're keeping the building, certainly we need to make the improvements, and if we decide we're gonna do something else, then we don't need that.
And then similarly, again, may be eligible, maybe not. I know we haven't talked about. There's, I think you said the Dodd fire alarm control system project is closed. That is good news. It still has about $190,000 left over. So, if that's eligible for closing out,
Yeah. With the-
conceivably we could transfer that authorization, or if it's been bonded.
And I
bond
probably
proceeds.
don't have that on my list, because I didn't focus on projects that were, in the last few years, because I
Right.
figured they still would be active.
We'll
So
go
again,
through
it's-
it with you.
It's
But
an
like
effort I want the council to be aware of, that we can do at the staff level, we can come with some ideas and proposals, but there are a lot, and this on the town side too, there are a lot of existing approved projects. Frankly, on our side especially, more than enough to keep us busy for the next year or two. So part of the justification for some of the town projects you'll see at our next meeting that I'm recommending delaying is we have plenty of approved projects now for the next 12 months. 12 months goes by very rapidly, and we're back here again. And I just think all things considered, that's something that we should be considering.
That next project down, the roof ladder replacements, that was bid out, so that's happening this summer. We've got 2 tranches totaling $250, so
Yep.
that's an OSHA requirement. So sometimes, to your point, it takes us, a couple of summers to get the projects, bid out and in progress, but those will be done
And I probably
this
did
summer.
bond that because you probably told me you were gonna be doing it, and
So again, you have that in your packet too. You can take it home and digest it and see if there's any questions that you have. And again, other than that, I think we walked through the first year projects. Again, the only focus tonight was on education, so we don't have.
so Sean, that's active projects as of today, right?
We reran this morning, so this is all as of today. hot off the press. And it's all projects that have more than a $10,000 remaining balance, so some of the, you may see, if you compare it to some of those that are in the list that Jim's authorizing, you remember some of those were under 10,000. They may not be on this list because we knew they were eligible. If they're under $10,000, it's likely just a matter of paperwork, and the procedures that he takes just to close it out. So these are projects we have assume they're still active. They're active in the Munis system. So whether or not they're ready to be closed out or not is, again, an ongoing conversation.
So at the staff level, you're gonna look at these projects here again, and by the end of capital, we'll know kind of which ones we close out, or is it just more of a rolling?
And ultimately, it's up to
rolling thing?
how quickly
Yeah.
Jim's able to get to
Yeah,
it.
probably the best way for me to just pound the pavement and knock on every department door.
I mean, from my perspective, candidly, I think if a project's more than 7 years old, I mean, we really, if it hasn't been started, I think we need to understand, is it still a priority for today? It's 7 years is a long time.
But even if it hasn't been started, the costs have to have changed. I mean, for most of those. So, I mean, just inflation alone. I mean, things have changed. So, we're going to be looking at some of these projects, maybe 10, 15 years old, that we have on here that are not even close to covering the cost of doing the job. So, I mean, I think 7 years might be the max that we should. And then anything over 7, maybe we can just.
Yeah, remember, candidly, I mean, I'm on my soapbox, but candidly, that's part of the challenge with approving maintenance-style capital projects, is that you can always do $20,000 of some millwork, or you could always do small, you know what I mean? It's not a distinct, you're right, you're not trying to buy a thing, a fire truck, or build a building, and then waiting 7 or 8 years. If they're maintenance in nature, then they can be tapped into, and you can spend some smaller portion of what you might have been able to get done with that money. But
Let's say you have a generator on there that's, we approved 8 years ago, and now you're not going to get it for the same price now. I mean,
or you'll get lower KWs or something.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a risk. So yeah, again, I think just all of it's worth. I think a lot has changed in the last 7 to 10 years, and I think our own budgetary realities have changed over the last couple of years. So I think they all deserve a hard look at what we have approved in the past and decide if they're still priorities. As we saw the effort at the beginning of the meeting, there's a process for closing them out, and it really helps those other priority projects that we're working on right now to fund them and get them accomplished.
I mean, the public works, public buildings, engineering, I mean, that's kind of one big group there, and then the Board of Ed is another big one. I think that's where I've got to focus to supplement what I already have. I mean, I've already put a lot of these on my list, but there's others that I wasn't, sure whether they were done, and that's what might help.
Okay, we'll help you call the list on our end.
All right, so I think with that then, I know that Mr. Jinks has asked that we include public comment. So I know that thank you for attending. If you have comments or questions you'd like to make, this is your opportunity.
Yes, and I'm unfortunate being the only resident online or in the room, so
Yes.
I get the floor, and I'm sure it's only 1 minute. So this is my first time attending any of these. I'm Barbara Massey, I live here in town. There's nothing I enjoy more on a Saturday night than reading through every single document that the town has produced in the past 5 years. So I come informed, and I appreciate all the work that the town does. Only as a recommendation, I strongly recommend some of the comments that Mr. Kimball made be followed to the letter by this town. You have overspent by far. It was a spending spree for a number of years. Step back and look not only in the detail, because the detail isn't going to help you right now. What you need to do is kind of step back and reprioritize, because a lot of these, as you said, are very old. The numbers will have changed dramatically. And so take a step back, take a look, decide what you need to do, because you've got such a massive debt on those 2 school buildings that you really need to be serious about that. Part 2 on that is, I'm also an engineer, full disclosure, among many other things that I do. And never take a vendor's word for what they say your efficiency will be on an HVAC system. That's always the rule of thumb for us engineers. You get your low efficiency, you get your high efficiency, and then you get someone else to run the efficiency for you other than the vendor who's selling it to you. Because you'll come up with a completely different number, and probably a more realistic one because they've got nothing to gain other than running the numbers for you. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for attending. Just for the record, could we get your address, please?
Sure, I'll give it to the young lady.
Excellent, thank you. With that, anything else from council members? Are we still good for Monday then? Okay.
We are good, yep, I think we have quorum has responded, right, Noel?
Has responded? Yes.
Okay. All right, so with that, I will accept a motion.
So moved. Second.
Motioned and seconded, and all in favor, and we are adjourned at 8:33. Thank you.
Very nice.